Hello, I'm Nick Haynes, and welcome to the best kept secret in the world, and it's hiding in plain sight. I specialize in couples and relationship counseling using emotionally focused therapy. In addition, I have training in mediation and have studied verbal communication over a number of years. I'm going to be doing a series of inspirational and educational videos about relationships, verbal communication, and yes, us, the human race. These will focus specifically on how we connect emotionally and relationally and how we talk to each other, what supports good relational and verbal connection, as well as what hinders it. Using this same lens, I'll also do some videos that look at some of the recent social issues that are challenging our society in relation to free speech and the style of how we talk to each other. While I also want to offer some reflections and observations on how we dealt with the pandemic, in particular from both a psychological and communication standpoint. So, why am I doing all this? Well, as someone who works with relationships and communication, I've felt for a very long time that our society is missing seeing something right in front of our noses to do with relationships and how we talk with each other, and that this has been detrimentally affecting the whole human race for a very long time and in a number of ways. You could call what I'm referring to as the relational and communication elephant in the room. And seeing it and embracing it, I believe, will be a key step in addressing many of the practical problems of human society. I also believe that it will play a very significant part in laying the foundation for us moving from being a violent and primitive species that is rapidly advancing technologically into a more highly evolved species that uses technology but bases its society and civilization first and foremost on love. A big claim, I realize, but I invite you to come on this journey with me and see if what I say makes some sense for you. Let's start right away with that elephant in the room reference. It refers to something that collectively as a species we're not noticing, speaking about, or even seeing in how we relate to each other. And in effect, this is the crux of what this channel is about. To put it simply, I don't think that we, the human race, really see and understand collectively how important emotional and relational connection really is to us all. Furthermore, I don't think that we see that emotional and relational disconnection is the key element that fuels tension and conflict. Let me say that again. To put it simply, I don't think that we, the human race, collectively see and understand how important emotional and relational connection is to us all. And furthermore, I don't think that we see that emotional and relational disconnection is the key element that fuels tension and conflict. I think we understand the importance of connection fairly well in certain contexts, like romantic relationships with our children, family, and friendships. However, we struggle to see its presence in less obvious situations that are part of everyday life. And the consequence of this traps us in what we could for now call getting caught up with looking in the wrong place when we experience difference and conflict. The key thing for us human beings is that our need for connection with each other is a biological imperative that drives much of our behavior, adults and children alike. Unfortunately, because it's so important to us, we tend to conceal or disguise it when we feel vulnerable and don't feel safe or secure to risk showing it directly. This is often as a result of fear that others won't accept or approve of us and won't be understanding and comforting in their response. So, we tend to disguise it in many other behaviors, reactions, and responses on the outside that others take at face value and engage with rather than seeing the vulnerability that is triggering them and often lying underneath. These behaviors on the outside can actually look very different in style. One person might be angry, attacking, criticizing, and complaining, while the other is doing the opposite, avoiding, stonewalling, shutting down, and withdrawing. While clearly different in style, all these behaviors on the outside have vulnerable emotional and relational feelings underneath, whether we're aware of it or not at the time. These external reactions are automatic, second-nature responses that are grooved into our lives through repetition, whether in our individual relationships or reflected to each other generally in wider society. And because we're not addressing and seeing the real relational need that is underneath the external behavior, we often get stuck in dissatisfying conversations, arguments, or worse. These conceal the vulnerability, they don't address it directly, and most importantly, cannot resolve it because they're not getting to the core of the issue. Making points, expressing opinions about the situation or the other person will indeed only make things worse, as emotion and connection needs validation, acknowledgement, and empathy, not explanation. Doubtless we've all probably experienced these sorts of conversations many times in our life. I know I have, and they tend to be the norm and end up with neither person feeling truly heard, understood, or satisfied. Okay, so if that gives us a very brief introduction to the part that emotional and relational connection plays in the elephant, let's also have a brief look at the part that verbal communication occupies. The first thing to be said about verbal communication and how we typically talk to each other is that we shouldn't assume that because we know what we mean, that the other person will necessarily have the same understanding and meaning as ourselves. Often we inadvertently and innocently arrive at different interpretations as to what we and others mean for all sorts of reasons. These include that the meaning applied to something that is said can actually naturally have more than one interpretation, and if each person is believing that their meaning is the only and right one, then this makes it far more likely to have a communication traffic accident. It also makes it far more difficult to resolve for obvious reasons. A good example of this are these images. I don't know whether you know about them. You can look at they have a two-way interpretation. And perhaps one of the most well-known ones of those is the profile of a woman. Some people swear they see an older woman, while others swear it's that of a young woman. Both are right. It's the same picture they're looking at, but it can be said to lie in the eye of the beholder as to which form they see. So in communication, if we do not realize that a different assumption to the meaning of what is being said is going on for each person, then it may lead to confusion, tension, and eventually an argument. Linguistics, which is the scientific study of language, shows us much more about what may be happening on these occasions and what can account for unintended miscommunication. It tells us about something called conversational style, where two people talking happen to be speaking from innately differing conversational styles without realizing it. It can be a recipe for misunderstanding, confusion, and potentially an argument. Therefore, us all knowing more about how conversational differences can affect understanding and relationship is clearly useful for us all to know about. Furthermore, to complicate matters, our emotions and sense of connection in any given moment both directly affect how we talk, what we say, as well as how we interpret the meaning of what others say. So language and how we feel have an extremely close relationship and are mutually very sensitive to each other, and they operate in a feedback loop that can affect each other for good or for ill. We'll look at more of this in later videos. Now, not to leave out the inspirational and I might say philosophical aspect of this channel, I would now like to say something about our evolution as a species and how I see our current trajectory. It seems to me that we, the human race, are at both a very challenging and polarized moment in our journey, but also, while it may be difficult to see right now, what you could describe as also an interesting and exciting one. What you might call a crossroads. Our optimism right now is clearly being very severely challenged in a number of ways, and we're going through many upheavals and changes, including difficulties in being understood and accepted for what we say. However, this challenge, shaking up of the old and everything being thrown up into the air, can be understood as often a necessary and natural step before a change to the new can take place. And as we all know, the darkest point always comes just before the dawn. Nevertheless, it's going to require us all to become more conscious and aware of what matters most to us about human life and existence, particularly in the face of increasing technology and forces that encourage us knowingly or unknowingly away from love, connection, freedom, and our humanity. For despite perhaps thinking of ourselves as sophisticated in evolutionary terms, it could be said that we're a relatively young and immature species, one that has moved through the 3 different stages in its history of hunter-gatherer, agriculture, and industrialization, and is now embracing a rapid advance in technology. Moreover, if we are to be realistic and honest, as we are seeing right now, the human race has a propensity for violence and war, and in certain situations can be murderous, along with, and of course balanced by, some significantly more redeeming features. So with the violent meeting the technological, and continuing to not sufficiently understand ourselves in crucial areas of our psychology, relationships, and verbal communication, this rather conjures up for me the not very reassuring metaphor of children playing with matches. It also poses the question, do we wish to stay on our present course of remaining violent and warlike, combined with rapid technological advance? Or do we wish our trajectory to be one of becoming a wise, loving, highly evolved species that only uses technology in a supportive, non-damaging way to person and planet, not just because something can be created or there is financial gain to be made, irrespective of consequences to the health of the people or the planet? If we choose the highly evolved path, and I very much hope we do, then how do we practically get there? So in terms of my own areas of expertise, it seems to me that first and foremost, the foundation of doing so is for the whole human race to become globally aware, in a far more conscious way, of the specific importance of relational connection and bonding to us all. To be aware that it is present in every daily human activity and endeavor, irrespective of whether we're conscious of it at the time or know someone well. It links us all and affects us all, the whole human race. Secondly, that we all sufficiently understand the complexities of verbal communication and how to use the methods of repair when miscommunication takes place, which it will all too easily and often do, as we can all attest to. Thirdly, that we can start doing something proactive about achieving these 2 goals, commencing right now. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. It won't be. Relationships and verbal communication are undoubtedly some of the most testing parts of our human experience, as we all know. They need loads of attention, and it is so easy to be misunderstood. It's sort of become second nature for us to interact and communicate the way we currently do. So it's not going to easily change overnight. However, we have to start somewhere, and I suggest we start right now. And it seems to me that one of the main ways that this is initially going to begin and happen the fastest is through education, and specifically mainstream education. Up till now, it seems to me that we've structured our educational system to largely lean more heavily towards intellectual understanding and preparing us for the job market and the maintenance of the economy. This has taken place at the expense of knowing ourselves psychologically, relationally, and linguistically in enough depth. And then we're surprised, or at a loss as to effectively know what to do when our society continues to chronically and acutely reflect widespread problems in our social relationships and cohesion. The answer is right in front of our noses. You get out what you put in, and if you don't put in enough quantity or quality of what truly sustains a healthy society and species, then we shouldn't be surprised at what comes out the other end. If we adjusted the syllabus in mainstream education to reflect a much greater amount taught about relationships, psychology, communication, and dispute resolution, this would undoubtedly directly filter through into having a lot less violence, murder, war, and societal problems. This is because we would be addressing the main source of these issues, which deep down is to do with the quality of our relationships with each other in one way or another. There will be a greater appreciation of other people, ourselves, and the situation we were in, and this would allow us to nip difference, tension, and conflict in the bud more often before it developed into something more consequently negative or destructive. In not seeing this, we could be said, in a sense, to have unintentionally abandoned ourselves. What we have most needed has been to recognize the vital role of relationship and communication in all our lives, and in particular how they regulate our responses and reactions to each other. Well, now we can, and now we must change. We can no longer as a species luxuriate in the excuse and innocence of having up till now in our history not developed psychology and verbal communication sufficiently to be able to recognize and understand what is often driving tension, conflict, and difference. We now have this knowledge, and we must do something about it, and no longer keep it just compartmentalized principally within the sciences and fields of psychology and linguistics, but extend it in an accessible and appropriate way to the whole human population. Because when you look at many of the problems in our world through the lens of relationship and communication, you would see that there's a clear fingerprint pointing towards them as arguably the principal source. So I would want to start seeing us include in education for every child from an early age in an age-appropriate way the following mainstream subjects. 1. The human need for bonding and connection, which essentially is what is known as attachment science. 2. The role of emotion in healthy human psychology. 3. Verbal communication in various forms, including studying linguistics. And 4. Learning dispute resolution and mediation skills and methods of how to create compassionate conversation for all. It therefore doesn't require us to have that well-worn phrase, a degree in rocket science, to see what would happen to human society over time as a result if we embrace this collectively. If we taught the above, we would be directly seeding and priming the basis for us changing the world into what so many of us have wanted but felt helpless and powerless to know how to achieve. This approach will be fundamental in shifting us from a species that has a propensity towards violence to one that begins to know itself sufficiently in all the necessary ways to mediate and temper this more primitive evolutionary tendency. Indeed, into one that more befits a species that is moving towards becoming highly evolved. Moreover, we will quickly see that a lot of the problems we have result directly from not knowing ourselves sufficiently in these areas, and we will begin to steadily reduce and resolve these problems and undoubtedly end up globally saving trillions of currency to boot. So to return to how this adjustment to the national curriculum in mainstream education should take root, we shouldn't just rely on the government and the education system solely to initiate the changes. We also need to involve other stakeholders that are well placed to contribute in addition. For example, it would speed up this process if professionals who work in psychology and verbal communication and the bodies and organizations that represent them feedback to government and educational policymakers the benefit of these subjects becoming a significantly more enhanced part of mainstream education from an early age. Likewise, if you are listening to this as an individual and connect with some of what I'm calling for, then your voice may be incredibly valuable too in influencing our direction and future just by talking to other people and sharing these ideas. As the saying goes, every little counts. Now, some people might say that for government to do this would be the actions of a nanny state and too interfering. I would like to offer an alternative characterization. It's actually just simple good sense, good housekeeping, and a wise and loving thing for any tribe to do to know the most important values and parts of how it basically ticks. To prioritize making this information available to its children and thus over time eventually its entire population. It makes enormous sense to do this because how else do you ensure the healthy functioning and continuation of your tribe and society if you don't give them all the basic tools and equipment they need to operate healthily? The family and schooling would still occupy the same roles in relationship as they do now in raising children. The adjustment would be in the syllabus that was taught. Other ways to disseminate valuable information on these vital subjects than just mainstream education is for professionals in these two fields to proactively put their expertise and knowledge out into the public domain. This could be done in the same way that medical practitioners and nutritionists are currently sharing knowledge through TV programs, internet sites, and social media about nutrition, health, and how our bodies work. An added benefit of widening the offering of this vital knowledge to a number of sources is that it speeds up the process of disseminating that information, as well as having the added bonus of increasing the sense of us all as a community working together as a collective. A welcome and warm feeling, and the one that doesn't just happen every 50 years because of a significant world event. Finally, to finish this opening video, I'd like to say a little bit more about a word I've used a couple of times already. It's a four-letter word that some young women when I was in my teens would somewhat gauchily refer to as the L word. Love. And I'd like to be clear that I'm using it in a secular context here, not in any religious, moral, even spiritual context. Practical, meaningful, common or garden love. Not only is love a feeling and experience that is extremely meaningful and enjoyable for us all, but I'd also say that it is both the core and the core value of human civilization. What is more, we human beings are wired up both to give love as well as need it. As long as you provide the right social circumstances and they are sufficiently nurtured, then the likelihood is that you will end with what is called in attachment science a securely bonded or attached individual. Just as if you water a plant and provide the right conditions to sustain its growth, the rest will follow. And when the majority of individuals are securely attached, then you have the basis of a healthy functioning society and an important plank in a primitive species becoming a more highly evolved one. Love is the fabric that weaves our society together, and there are many ways in which we see love at work, not always being directly referred to by name, but very much involved in action. However, it does seem to me that as a species we are what I might call slightly shy about speaking about love, and love is not a word that you hear very often, for example, when politics or business or science are being discussed, or other practical parts of human society. We tend to use it more directly in or about our personal relationships. This is where we seem most comfortable to refer to it by name. However, if we are to raise our consciousness as a species, then I believe that love and speaking about it needs to come out of the closet more in all sectors and vectors of human life, especially in politics, business, and science. And as I've indicated, I think this needs to be backed up by understanding our more basic relational, psychological, and communication needs for love as a species. Finally, it surely cannot be beyond the wit, imagination, and determination of us human beings to have an economic and political system that works for us all and the environment, that it is the servant of us rather than us allowing ourselves to be put into the position of being the servant or slave of it to the exclusion of other human beings and species that we share this beautiful planet with. And that we do the expedient thing that any wise and loving tribe does for its members, which is not only to pass down knowledge that is relevant to the healthy functioning of each member, but also to demonstrate and encourage that that knowledge is part of all aspects of human life and society. Okay, so to summarize the main points of what we've covered today, there's a huge elephant in the room that as a society we've not sufficiently fully recognized. The main part of it involves our need for emotional and relational connection with each other in everything we do. Additionally, verbal communication plays a significant role in connecting us or separating us. That mainstream education needs to become more plentifully values-based in how it prepares us for life. That we are at a point in our evolution where if we are to attain the consciousness of a more highly evolved and loving species, that we need to fully embrace these fundamental parts of human life and existence in every part of our society. That's all for today. I hope you found the content interesting, helpful, and perhaps thought-provoking. In the next couple of videos, I'm going to look at attachment and our need for connection more closely, as well as looking at the enormous importance of emotions in our lives. Don't miss those, as they provide the foundation for understanding and seeing the most significant part of what's running conflict in us human beings. Please hit the like and subscribe button so that you can be made aware as soon as a new video comes out, and do let others know about this channel. Thank you, and see you next time.